going to be talking about Ubuntu Studio. And we're going to be talking about its past, what's going on, its present, and what we might be talking about in its future. If you didn't know that's what we're going to be talking about, then that's probably not what you're here for, but this is what we're planning on talking about, so that's what we've got going on. And just a little bit about myself. I am from Washington, but not that Washington, this Washington. This is Seattle, basically my hometown. It's where I grew up, beautiful Seattle. And this is my lovely family, my son Jonathan, my wife Amy, they are right here in front, and our dog Dino. And just this past May, we added another addition to our family. This is Coda, our husky, our big troublemaker, because he is now 65 pounds, and he's only 8 months old, and he gets into all the trouble. Anyhow, a little bit more about myself. I'm the project leader. I started building electronic circuits at age 6. I knew and understood them. I could read schematics. Self-taught myself actual basic on VIC-20s and Commodore 64s at age 10. Taught myself photography by age 11. I understood framing, focus, and not quite f-stop, but I was getting there. I was brought in to do audio engineering at my church, starting just before my 14th birthday, so age 13. I have a degree in leadership, which I acquired in 2008. I am a videographer and video editor. I am also a freelance professional photographer. And I have worked in live audio, video and audio engineering throughout the Western United States. And I do user experience and packaging for the Ubuntu Focus line of laptop computers, one of which is sitting right there that I'm using for my presentation. I first got my first computer I ever looked at, first computer I ever set eyes on was probably when I was 5 years old, a Commodore Amiga that my uncle owned. And I first had, my first user experience was that color desktop right there, the Amiga Workbench. And then my elementary school, when I was about 8 or 9, was the first one in the state of Washington to get a computer lab full of Macintosh Plus computers. And then when I was about 8 or 9, we got a hand-me-down Commodore VIC-20 for free, which I learned to program BASIC on, and that's what the user interface looked like. And how disappointed was I that I was like, where's the mouse? There's no mouse on this thing. And then we had a Commodore 64. Again, where's the mouse? But this one could do music. I could do music on, when I was about 10 years old, I was already learning clarinet at my school. I was already a musician. I loved music. So I could write music and make music using it. It had the SID chip. So it already had potential here, but I was still programming in BASIC. I could make notes in BASIC. But then a gift came one day, a hand-me-down Amiga 1000. Suddenly I was in the big leagues. I had a mouse finally. I could make music using this. I could paint using this. This was the first computer that could actually interface with that TV studios were using for, it could do Genlock, basically. Genlock is what's used for synchronizing and being able to place overlay graphics onto TVs at the time using the NTSC signal type, which was only a resolution of 640 or 600 by 400, which was the native output for a Commodore Amiga. That's what the Amiga Workbench looked like. And then, eventually, we got an Amiga 2000 HD, which had a hard drive installed. This one was unique also in that it had what was called an Amiga bridge board. This bridge board allowed it to run IBM PC applications. So there's the Amiga Workbench, a little bit better of a user experience, but everything's in a window, including the desktop itself. But this bridge board allowed me to install Slackware onto the 8088 processor, which acted as an IBM PC XT. So this was my first introduction to Linux right here. I was about 14. And in high school. Then we fast forward to 2008, October, when I'm working for the University of Idaho, and my boss, who we're working in video conferencing, he asked me to look for a way to put together a cheap video conferencing codec, compressor decompressor, because at this time Skype was just barely a thing. So he asked me to see if there's any way we can put this together using a computer. So I look at Linux. We already had been serving a Ubuntu mirror at the University of Idaho. So I look at this, and I'm like, this has potential because it had a program at the time, I forget what the name of it is, but it could interface with our hardware codecs. So I looked at this, and this was my first introduction to Ubuntu back in 2008. It was Intrepidix 8.10. So, which gets us into Ubuntu Studio. Its first release was on May 10th, 2007. I don't know if this was an official release as an official flavor. But it was 7.04 Feisty Fawn. But as of this year, 2022, we have 15 years of Ubuntu Studio. That's some huge accomplishments. So that's 32 releases as of 22.10 Kinetic Kudu. And one thing about Ubuntu Studio, it's not tied to a desktop environment, unlike any other flavor that is currently any other official flavor. Mythbuntu. It used to be an official flavor. It's gone. It was not tied to a desktop environment. It used XFCE. Edubuntu. It used Unity. It's no longer an official flavor. Ubuntu Studio is the only official flavor of Ubuntu Studio not tied to a desktop environment. So it has had 3 default desktop environments in its lifetime. From 7.04 to 11.04, it used GNOME, and then XFCE from 11.10 until 20.04, and then from 20.10 until present, it's all on KDE Plasma. Started as a script before 7.04 somewhere on a wiki. This is how you add audio and video features to Ubuntu. So what it looked like, sudo apt-get install, blah, 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 configure this file, configure that file, do something, and profit. I've been able to find this wiki entry. I don't know where it was. But we'll talk about the first release, which was 7.04 Feisty Fawn, again, May 10th, 2007. Was it an official flavor or derivative? I don't know. I've been unable to solidify that answer. I know that I can't find the ISO image anywhere. Archive.org, nowhere. It doesn't exist as far as I can find it. Only been able to find reviews and pictures. Speaking of which, here it is. This is what it looked like initially. As you can see here, it had this nice dark gray. And the desktop was just as gray as the Seattle sky. It was just gray everywhere. Which isn't bad when you're coming from an artistic background and you're trying to draw in GIMP and Inkscape. But it could have used some pizzazz. I will put it that way. But that takes us to the first confirmed official release of Ubuntu Studio. 7.10 gets given in October 2007. Definitely an official flavor at this point because I was able to find on an official outdated mirror the ISO image. And here until 12.04, it was only an alternative text-only installer, no live ISO image until that 20.04 image dropped. And here it is. I actually got this from a virtual machine. This is my own image. We have category menus, the custom categories here with audio production, video production. And you can see we already have Ardor. And it's already ready to go out of the box. But then things got a little different in 9.10 in Karmic Koala. You can see we still have, and our app list is growing. And things are getting better, but I wanted to bring your attention to one thing. And this will get better as we go. That's Studio Controls right there. We'll zoom in on it a little bit. It doesn't do much right now, but it gets better as we go on. It just enables our net memlock, enables raw 13A4 access for FireWire, enables nice mode. This was vital back then because you needed that for the RealTime Kernel, which is what we had at the time. Then we get into 10.04 LTS Lucid Links, which was the last LTS to use GNOME. Then 11.10 Aneric Ocelot, first version to use XFCE with GNOME 2 pieces. It wasn't completely converted to XFCE yet. And then 12.04 LTS Precise Pangolin, first LTS to use XFCE, first version to fully use XFCE, and the first version with a live ISO that you could boot to. And this was my first look at Ubuntu Studio. And by the way, I fell in love with it. Because this came out shortly after my son was born. And I was looking at Ubuntu and its derivatives at the time. And I was looking for something I could easily do audio, video, photography, production on without having to pay Apple an arm and a leg because that's where I was at. I was using PowerPC Apples at the time. They were all going the way of the Dodo because they were being phased out by the Intel processor. So I needed something so that I wasn't being stuck with Apple. So here we have 12.04. And then we'll fast forward a few years to 16.04 LTS Xennial Xeris. And we still have our custom menus in the Whisker menu now, and we're on XFCE still. We'll go to 18.04 Bionic Beaver. Looks pretty much the same as 16.04, doesn't it? I want to show you something. 18.04 Bionic Beaver, what's missing here? It wasn't an LTS. Not an LTS. 18.04 Ubuntu Studio was the only official flavor to skip an LTS version. What happened? Why did this happen? Shortly after 16.04's release, Hallstrom was elected leader. Shortly thereafter, he got a job that took up all his time. He couldn't hold that leader position. He had nobody to fall back on. The project lost its only archive uploader, who was a Motu, master of the universe. There was nobody else left to lead the project. Project lost its vision. So in February of 2018, the team that was left put out, basically acted in desperation. Ross Gammon, who's a Debian developer on the team, got onto the website, posted a article, put out a call from the Ubuntu Studio to form an Ubuntu Studio Council on the Ubuntu Studio website and mailing list. Very few respondents. Actually, I found out there was only one. That was me. Any Hamilton fans in here? Enter me, he said in parentheses. So nobody raised their hands on that, so I'll skip the hip-hop show I was about to do. So came around March 2018. We have an IRC meeting, and I ended up leading it because there was no agenda. So I went ahead and I did the standard leadership things because I had a leadership degree. Do we have any old business? Do we have any business that we need to talk about now? Do we have any new business? Nobody had any ideas. So I said, do we have any ideas that you guys have come up with that we haven't been able to get addressed? So they need a release manager. I take on that role because I knew it was a role that needed to be filled. So via mailing list, we decided not to release as an LTS since nobody is comfortable signing off on it. So that's why it wasn't an LTS. We just didn't have the people. We didn't have an uploader. We didn't have the manpower. Nobody was proud of this one. So we went with the standard 9 months of support. April of 2018, we released 1804 Bionic Beaver, non-LTS. July of 2018, I'm officially handed the role of project leader by SET with no objections from the rest of the team. This starts what I like to call the Great Ubuntu Studio Reboot. Len Ovens, he's known as Ovenworks, brings up the ideas for Ubuntu Studio controls to add real-time provisions if they don't exist with the click of a button. Set jack parameters for people very easily with the click with drop-down menus to start and stop jack. To have a very small daemon to monitor USB devices for automatic connection to jack. And to get multiple audio devices connected to jack at once. I thought this was revolutionary because at the time, I only knew of one way to connect jack to one audio device jack at a time. So I was like, roll with it, do it, get it done. This will perhaps turn this around. Elo de Gruel, who is here and has her own presentation coming up tomorrow. She brought up a new wallpaper that she had designed for 1804 that never made it in. And me, I filled holes and decided to learn packaging and get upload rights. I got help from Simon Quigley and Thomas Ward to learn packaging, both from the Ubuntu team. Simon Quigley is here. He was only 16 at the time, but he was already a Debian developer and an Ubuntu core developer. But he and I have a very strong relationship to this day, and you'll see me hang out with him a lot. But yeah, we got that done. We got me package upload rights. And we got Elo's wallpaper sponsored and got other changes sponsored for upload. But I found out the team was unfamiliar with the rest of Ubuntu had been doing. It's like they were living on their own island. They didn't know that the Ubuntu desktop had even switched back to GNOME from Unity over a year ago at that point. They didn't know Ubuntu Mate was a flavor. They didn't know the newest flavor was Ubuntu Budgie. I'm like, Ubuntu, I reminded them that Ubuntu Studio is not tied to its desktop environment. XFCE is not Ubuntu Studio. I tell them, look at what the other flavors are doing. See if there's anything we can learn. Maybe one of the other desktop environments could be an alternate environment for Ubuntu Studio. But in the meantime, here's 1904 Disco Dingo. And this, to this day, is one of the favorite wallpapers that people still talk about with the glowing dingo. And Aile's wallpaper, you can't really see it, but it is a dark blue in the background. Looks like it's almost painted there, but the dingo I added on there, that's the official dingo from Ubuntu. Made it glow, added the logo, and then we switched to the papyrus icons and the materia theme. Now here's the thing, this is the only screenshot I could get because the VM would crash on me every time. So I don't know why. But that's what we got. But moving on, Len reported back on his DE desktop environment exploration. Now this guy, every time he gets a desktop environment, he puts it back to look like CDE. He is very traditional. So the old common desktop environment from before KDE even. So he loved Node 2, loved XFCE, but he was surprised at how far KDE Plasma 5 had come and fell in love with it. Fell in love with it so much he decided to make it his daily driver. We decided to try and make a second DE ISO image with KDE Plasma as the desktop environment, but this doesn't go so well. It becomes very time prohibitive, and we find out it requires access and know-how that we don't have at the time. And also, we find out it would require us to basically create a whole new flavor of Ubuntu, including the approval process and everything. None of us had time to do that at the time. So we look at the Ubuntu Studio Mega Package installer. Underutilized, no longer serving its purpose, installing mega packages of Ubuntu Studio after installation. Unfortunately, it wasn't being used because the installer, which is Ubiquity, had a module that would allow you to pick and choose what meta packages you install at the time. We had to get rid of that module because it was no longer working. In fact, it was crashing every time. So we could repurpose this tool. It became Ubuntu Studio Installer, which we decided to use for installing Ubuntu Studio on other official flavors of Ubuntu. It replaced the need for creating ISO images, the ISO image with the secondary desktop environment, which, like I said, would have amounted to a whole new flavor of Ubuntu. Oops. So, in the meantime, here we come out with our very next LTS, Focal Fossa, Fusa, however you want to pronounce it. And this was a wallpaper that I actually made based on our brand new website design that was given to us by some contributing members who just wanted to give back for our hard work. And it was great. And Ayla made also a wallpaper. And I liked her wallpaper as well. And that became our lock screen wallpaper for the next several releases. And we used the materia icon or the papyrus icons and the materia desktop theme. And it looked really nice. I still get compliments on how it looked to this day. And here's what happened with Ubuntu Studio controls and Len's genius in making it work exactly how he had designed it. And to be able to set up jack, to be able to connect USB. It was just a complete vision that a lot of people hadn't even thought about being able to do with it, and it just turned out amazing. Has a button to open Carla, which is Felipe's application he did a great job with. He's in the room here. Didn't mean to draw attention there. So, Len Ovens is actually the lead developer of Ubuntu Studio. I'm not. I'm just the project leader. But he's the lead developer because of what he does with Studio controls. He's a very conservative Linux user. He uses CDE-like environment with high contrast, so he rips out the default theme and puts in his own theme, which is awesome. It's for him. He says, not like the direction that GNOME is going. Did not like the direction of Unity, and grew tired of XFCE. Loved the direction of KDE Plasma and started using Kubuntu with the Ubuntu Studio installer. He never used 20.04 of LTS of Ubuntu Studio as you saw it there. He was using Kubuntu with Ubuntu Studio installer. I found out the rest of the team was too. I was like, okay. So what do you do when your community is doing one thing, but you're putting out for your users what you're not doing? What does that tell you? That tells you kind of need to pivot. So that's when we decided to go, I posed a question to the team. Instead of, should we switch to KDE Plasma? Should we do it? They were on board. Like, let's do it. With one caveat. Eric, you gotta do all the work. I'm like, okay, so you can ask my wife. I pretty much spent the entire month of May 2020 during the pandemic switching the seed over, switching the meta over, getting all that taken care of. And first version with Plasma was 20.10, and it looked great. And the first LTS on Plasma was Jammy Jellyfish 22.04. And here's what it looked like. / looks like because it's still supported. And it looks great. We brought back the dark theme by default. Using Breeze, believe it or not, just recolored. But the papyrus icon still, because we still wanted to keep it individualized from Kubuntu. We still wanted our own branding. But one thing that I will point out here is how easy it is to go from this style of menu. You right click, you get this menu here, switch to the application menu, and now you get a more traditional menu where you can see our custom categories. How cool is that? And here's Studio controls. Now on the live ISO, permissions aren't set up properly. But once you install, boom, you've got your real-time permissions all set up. But Studio controls, we forked it off of Ubuntu Studio controls, and it's its own upstream project now. And you can contribute to it, and it goes on Arch, it goes on Fedora, it goes on several distros now. And it works. And we moved the buttons that were on the bottom to the side, and just all sorts of great stuff. The flow is better. Yeah. Works really well. So, latest release, 22.10, Kinetic Kudu, includes new applications for live production and houses of worship. Now, the reason that's important, that's kind of my background, is live production. Numerous bug fixes for Studio controls. We had some Python 3.10 incompatibility. How are we doing on time? We're doing great on time. Audacity was finally updated to 3.2. Created a feature uninstaller. Does the reverse of Ubuntu Studio installer. So if you're a graphic designer, you don't want the audio stuff, you just go in there and click I don't want audio. It'll uninstall that for you. Oh, and this talks about kind of our problems here. I'll just go ahead and bring up the whole thing because my animation didn't work right. We've got some challenges with Pipewire currently. It doesn't support any Jack backends other than ALSA, so for instance, NetJack and FFADO for Firewire. It doesn't support that. And so those are some struggles that we're working with, being able to switch quickly between backends. So we want to be able to develop ways to switch between those. And we had somebody in the chat room say, in our IRC chat, say, it seems like a worse idea to replace something that just because with something that's of lower quality. Right now, because of these deficiencies, Pipewire is of lower quality than the traditional setup of ALSA, just going straight to ALSA with Jack and Pulse Audio. So these are the challenges that we are currently facing. By the way, we're in the present now, as far as our timeline is concerned. Ubuntu Studio installer remains untested with PipeWire setups. So currently, using Ubuntu Studio installer with Ubuntu Desktop might not go so well because it uses PipeWire by default. So that's a challenge as well, because then you have to revert that back to the traditional Pulse audio setup. So what does the future hold? Might change the interface up a little bit, bring back the Materia theme. I was noticing that if you launch Firefox, because it's a snap now, it colors, because it's sensing the Breeze theme, it looks and gets the Breeze default palette, and that's incompatible with our palette. It just looks funny. But if I use the Materia theme, it looks fine. So maybe we'll just go with that. So theming updates, studio controls. Like I was saying, that PipeWire Pulse Audio Jack FFDO switch, that might be a good thing to have. Audio plugins come and go. Development of the CAF plugins has stalled out. It'd be nice to see that start up again. Yeah, I see you guys laughing. We dropped them several releases ago. It'd be nice if they actually started that up again, but we'll see. Might drop VLC this next cycle from the default setup, just because they're having trouble with FFmpeg 5 and their VA API. So those are some of the struggles that we're having. You know, are we going to do VLC, the VLC snap perhaps, which has FFmpeg 4 included, or go to Haruna? We'll see. You know, there's several different things we could do. And of course, we're always open to suggestions. You know, this is a community effort. This is not Eric and his minions, you know, this is just, I'm always open to suggestions from the community. And, you know, that's one thing that Noah Chalaya of Destination Linux podcast back then and the Ask Linux show has said about me. He's a friend of mine, by the way. He once said, that's one thing about Eric. He's always willing to take suggestions and implement them. So, you know, I'm open to suggestions. And that's one thing that my team has always said too. You know, I'm not gonna, you know, it's one thing I learned when I got my leadership degree. You gotta take suggestions. Can't be doing it by yourself. And with that, because that's what we're looking at the future, because we don't have a crystal ball. Do we have any questions? Yes?
So one really interesting thing recently in the world is the proliferation of non-free and open source tooling in the AV world that's making it to Linux. So I'm thinking of like DaVinci Studio, Reaper, you know, these great softwares. Does the Ubuntu Studio team have any networking with those kinds of companies? Just try it out, see how it's working, get feedback?
Well, I mean, it'd be nice to be able to package those things, but unfortunately, because they aren't open source, we can't. They could probably offer their items up as snap packages. But again, because they're not open source, they don't meet the qualifications to be a seeded snap. So one thing about Ubuntu Studio is that it is literally an ISO to download. And it's part of the greater Ubuntu ecosystem. And if it can't be included in the archive or as a seeded snap, then unfortunately we can't work with it. So it has to have an open source license, and DaVinci Resolve does not have something like that, unfortunately. That said, I'm going to throw another hat on. I work for the Ubuntu Focus project, which is their hardware partner. We have used DaVinci Resolve to create videos very successfully on Kubuntu and Ubuntu Studio. So we have been doing testing with that, and it works perfectly. So there's that. I don't know how much more feedback I can give you on that.
Yeah, that's fine. I use both locally, how much you can just like play with it and give feedback. You kind of have to do it as a non-community thing, right? Where it's like, yeah, I'm a part of this, but I'm just playing.
Exactly. And, you know, it just, you know, speaking from the total Ubuntu Motu's perspective, we can't include it in the archives. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have the right license. And while it can be a snap, if they wanted to package it as a snap, they're more than welcome to, because you can have non-free snaps. It cannot be a seeded snap because it still has to have a free license to be a seeded snap. Yes?
So related to the previous question, I see a bunch of applications, like commercial applications, proprietary applications, preferring to go to FlatHub rather than Snap. Do you know if, like, I know that it's like a competitor kind of thing, but do you know if there's any chance that Ubuntu Studio could include some way of fetching things from FlatHub to help these cases?
I actually tried that one time. I went down that road. So just for an example, there is DisplayCal, which used to be in Ubuntu Studio, but was dropped because the upstream developer is still in Python 2. Python 2 was dropped. It's pretty harshly too. And so there goes all the dependencies that are completely gone, you know, all that sort of thing. And so, and he's refused to move on from Python 2 because he's getting all of his income from Windows and Mac, getting donations that way. So he doesn't really care about moving on to Python 3. However, his package was packaged in FlatHub. It's not packaged as a snap, so I can't seed it. I've tried packaging it as a snap, and I've run into a lot of roadblocks. Which, if I had that, then I could definitely do it. That said, when it comes to those items being packaged on FlatHub, I have run into roadblocks getting Flatpaks seeded. Basically, from the technical board, I got a very harsh no, nothing from FlatHub, ever. So that's where we stand. What's that?
Is there a technical rationale? Or
technical rationale is untrusted. Because they can't verify what's uploaded to that. So.
So this is a sort of super basic question, and you might have actually said this right at the beginning before I stepped in, but what would you describe as the point of Ubuntu Studio?
I'm sorry?
What would you describe as the point or the purpose of Ubuntu Studio?
Okay, the point of purpose of Ubuntu Studio is to bring creativity to everyone.
So if I understand correctly, all of the packages that you include in Ubuntu Studio could actually be installed individually by the user. So
Yes.
there's something in particular about the fact that it happens all at once at install time?
So it saves a lot of time. If you have an all-inclusive ISO that has all of this in it, then when you have it installed already and you don't have to hunt for all the packages, then you're good to go. It's like Tom was saying last night during his presentation. He just installed it and everything he needed was right there. So that's pretty much the point of it, is to save a lot of time, a lot of expense of the user in time looking for everything that they need. Everything that they need is right there, especially if they're for creativity. Now, from my perspective, as an audio engineer, photographer, videographer, video editor, and even a musician to a certain extent, everything I need to do anything I can possibly ever dream of is right there. There's even desktop publishing in there. Now, granted, you could take anything that you need in regular Ubuntu and install all of that. But when it comes to the audio configuration, that's a lot more difficult, as Tom also talked about last night. We make that a lot easier. Like Ubuntu Studio Installer doesn't just install a bunch of meta packages, it actually does some tweaking in the background. There's actually a meta package called Ubuntu Studio Tweaks that does a lot of that configuration for you using scripting.
If you've ever tried to set up Jack yourself, like just install Jack and then get everything talking, you'll understand why Ubuntu's doing this great.
Oh, he understands.
I've wasted so much of my life doing that on this like random Ubuntu or random other thing, or Mac OS. It's like, oh, I need Jack working. It's like, okay, there's 2 pieces of my life I'll never get back.
All right. Got a few more minutes for some questions.
One more. Like, because the real-time kernel, basically, is going to be about my question is, all the patches so far from real-time kernel are getting slowed into mainline. So I'm wondering if sometime we're going to have the real-time kernel back into Ubuntu, in a way that it's not actually a separate build, separate, completely separate package, but just a variant. Like we have the low latency, we have the real-time variant of the same kernel. Is that coming sometime? Well,
it's funny you mentioned that because I actually just spoke with Dmitry Ledkov, who was here not too long ago about that. He is part of the kernel team. When you do real time, there's a lot of trade-offs that happen, as you're probably well aware of. Now, with the low latency kernel, it's configured by default with a lot of the real-time patches already applied. The only thing that you really have to do is in the command line, and we do this by default in Ubuntu Studio. All you really have to do is add the thread IRQ as parameter. And that takes care of most of it. But the biggest trade-off that you lose is you lose a lot of power you get a lot of power consumption out of it. So like your laptop, it's gonna just start eating battery life even at idle. So if you're on a desktop computer, that's not so much of an issue because then you're plugged into an AC outlet and you'll just see a spike in your power bill. No big deal, right? So when you start talking about real time, then you start talking about even more of that. And then you start talking about even more battery usage on your laptop and even more AC spikes and whatnot. Now, there is a real-time kernel that Canonical is working on, but they are intending it for Internet of Things devices and things that are plugged in directly to the AC outlets. So this is not the type of thing that we're probably going to see too much of in the consumer devices on at least AMD architecture, but definitely on perhaps ARM devices, but not intended for like desktop or laptop machines.
Maybe it works
You can dream. You can try it, I'm sure.
because Debian actually has a real-time kernel now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's sad that Ubuntu does not have one.
Right, and I'm sure the Debian developers probably tell you the same thing, that it's not really intended for that purpose.
I run that on my laptop, and I think to be the kind of person that doesn't really care.
Yeah, if you don't care, you don't care.
I don't
Yeah.
really care how long my battery lasts, and so from my perspective, I just want hard RT. I don't really care even if it halves the battery life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And yes.
What are some of the apps that are installed?
What's that?
What are some of the apps that are installed with it? Do you have KDE Live with it?
KDE Live, that's one of them. Oh man, you're that's a loaded question because with Ubuntu Studio, you mean, right? Okay, so KDE Live, Digicam, there's OBS Studio. In fact, I like to tout it as the only operating system geared towards live streamers. So I actually have a lot of live streaming friends, so I try to tell them, hey, here's a whole operating system for your live streaming computer.
ABS to me is SUSE open build system.
I'm sorry?
ABS to me is SUSE's open build system. I'm guessing that.
Oh, no, OBS Studio is for live streaming and screen recording. Yeah, that's different from open build system. But yeah, I can see how you get confused. Lots of things with the same name. There's also GIMP, Krita. So two things that you would think serve the same purpose, but don't really. One's more geared towards drawing. The other one's more geared towards manipulating images. There's another one. You have Ardor. You have, let's see. Trying to think of all the ones. Carla. You have. See, now I have to look at my laptop. Oh, let's see. Here, let me try to mirror my screen here so you can kind of see. Let's mirror my screen. Okay, so don't mind me being a Microsoft Edge user, but
That's KDE software too.
I'm sorry?
Microsoft Edge is made from KDE HTML.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Let's see. Hydrogen, so drum machine. We've got Qtractor. Let's see, graphic design. We've got Darktable. Just to name a few. Creator, like I said, Scribus. What's that?
Color Chooser.
Color Chooser, yes, it's a KDE because we used to have the GNOME equivalent, but then being KDE by default, I just made the executive decision. We're just going to switch that one out real quick. Video production, we got brand new ones, Free Show. That's actually for houses of worship to be able to display song lyrics on their screens. It's still in very early production, but that's actually a snap. I had to package that one as a snap because it's an Electron app, and Electron apps don't package at all using the traditional Debian packaging system. Let's see, KDE Live, OBS Studio, like I was talking about. QLC Fixture Editor, this is a great one for manipulating lights for a stage. So stage lighting.
You could use that.
Let's see, there's tons of things. It's just so, there's just so many. The best thing you could probably do is go to ubuntustudio.org and download it because and explore. Get the live system, it'll boot right up and everything's already there. It's about 5 gigabytes right now. It doesn't fit onto a DVD anymore, but it'll fit onto most USBs now.
One more. So, because Snap keeps being mentioned, all the packages are mostly from the normal repositories.
Mhm.
Maybe the exceptions are from Snap.
Yeah, Firefox and FreeShore are the only two.
Yeah. Is that changing? Because, for example, if you want to update some of those applications, you either use the backwards PPA or wait for the next release. But is there a move towards Snap in terms of packaging for regular applications?
So it depends. I try to avoid snaps as far as packaging goes, but every now and then that does happen. Like for instance, FreeShow, because it's an Electron application, the Debian packaging system that Launchpad uses cannot package it, unfortunately.
Yeah, but in the case of being in the repository.
Right. So updating you're talking about.
Yeah.
So here's the cool thing about that. Typically, when you reboot your computer, it'll automatically update that package for you upon boot.
On Snap?
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty cool that way. So it downloads in the background and then updates for you.
Is it can it be disabled after being updated automatically?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you want to update it manually, you can go into the terminal, sudo snap refresh.
But my main question is Ubuntu Studio or maybe Ubuntu in general, no. Is there a wish to move from these packages, the REPL packages, favoring the Snap packages that are more frequently updated?
I would say it depends on the package, and that's definitely a question that's above my pay grade. Yes.
Do you do any quality assurance, test all the software that you ship, or the custom builds that you do, if it works reliably, or plugins load, or a team for doing that?
Yes. So quality assurance. Do a lot of QA with the Ubuntu team, believe it or not, because we have a common installer. we have one big tester. His name is Aaron Rainbolt. He does a lot of testing for both Ubuntu and Ubuntu Studio. So he tests not only the installer, but Aaron tends to go through every single application that both we install and Ubuntu installs, makes sure everything is working right. And he's a musician himself and a bit of an artist. So Ubuntu Studio is his favorite, or Ubuntu Studio and Ubuntu are both his favorite flavors. So he tends to give us a lot more scrutiny than he would any other flavor of Ubuntu. So he's really good about doing the QA, and he's joined the team within the past 6 months and has been doing a fantastic job.
You're doing it before release?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and 22.10 I want to say is probably one of our better releases because of what he has been, the amount of scrutiny he's been putting it through. Yeah, and we have been partnering with the Ubuntu team on the installer as well to try to really get that down, and Simon and I have been working on that too. So, yes.
The Plasma team says, thank you very much for using Plasma, and it's awesome, and do you use Wayland, and what needs to be done to get you using Wayland?
So Wayland is still experimental. We partner with the Kubuntu team on that one because we use the exact same packages. And that one is definitely on the horizon because I have been seeing a lot more stability with Wayland lately. Part of my day job with the Ubuntu Focus project. I have been doing a lot of testing on that, and it didn't really work out so well with 22.04, but 22.10, the Wayland stability in 5.26 of Plasma is just off the charts. So that's something that I'm looking forward to in Ubuntu Studio, trying to get some of the Wayland defaults working pretty well that way. Try to get that out of beta as much as possible, you know what I'm saying? Any other questions? All right, I think we're 5 minutes over, so I think we're done.